This is going to be our final tutorial for After Effects for this semester, and I want to introduce you to the Cinema 4D capabilities. This is going to be a really information-heavy tutorial, and you don't necessarily need to incorporate any Cinema 4D into your final projects, but I do want to give you this, this information and these skills so that if you're interested in applying them to your final projects, that you absolutely can. So the first thing I want to show you is, let me go ahead in After Effects, create a new composition with the same settings we've been using. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And the first thing I want to show you is if I go ahead and let me create a new shape layer here. There's the first thing that I can do to add more three-dimensionality or more 3D kind of effects or assets to my scene is I can, I'm going to go ahead and create a shape layer. Let me go and build my shape, because so far we've been using 3D, but just as like kind of creating a 3D space in After Effects, not necessarily any 3D objects. All of our objects have been 2D objects that we've been placing in 3D space. So the first way to bring 3D objects into After Effects is, the first way I can do it is to generate a shape form here in After Effects, turn on my 3D, and let's go ahead and look at custom view here so we can see it in 3D space. Maybe I'll choose two views. I'll have this first view be my active camera view, and my second view will be a side view. And the first way, and here under my shape layer, you see something called geometry options. Geometry options have been grayed out because we're working here in this classic 3D renderer. If I change this renderer to, I can click it here, or I can change it here, to a Cinema 4D renderer, hit OK. Now my geometry options are open to me, and I have a few of them here. The first one being bevel, whole bevel depth, and extrusion. Let me go ahead and show you extrusion. And if what you can see happening in my custom view is that I am generating some depth to this object. I'm kind of extruding or pulling out that shape into 3D space. It's hard to kind of see. You can't really see it in my active camera. I'm still kind of looking straight on this object, but here in my custom view you can see it. It's still, because we don't have any lights, I can't see any of its definition. So let me go ahead and create a light in the scene. Layer, new light. Spotlight, and let me move this spotlight so that I'm able to see. Let me move this light, let me kind of rotate it so that I'm able to see that top edge. And now you can see I've kind of generated a 3D form using just my After Effects tools. Now there's not a whole lot of variety to this. I can just create a little bit of depth to the 2D objects. I can also make a bevel. Let me go ahead and bevel this. If I increase the bevel, you will see it here that this object, if I maybe give it more, oh, bevel style, that's why bevel depth is fine. But if I choose bevel style, I can bevel this object, which means that it gives it a bit of an edge, like a chamfered edge. So I can either do angle or concave. Okay, so this is just a way that I can maybe add a little bit more interest in 3D just within After Effects. Now, if I want to use Cinema 4D in all of its full capabilities, this is just the renderer that gives us some geometry options. The way that I'm going to do that is to create a Cinema 4D layer. So I'm going to hit New, Max on Cinema 4D File. Before I do that, let me go ahead and save my project. And I'm going to create a new folder in my computer animation folder. I'm going to call it C4D. And I'm going to save my project in that folder as demo. I'm going to save it whatever you would like. Let me go ahead just for now and turn off these other layers in my scene. And now let me go ahead and create a new Cinema 4D file. Now I can import Cinema 4D files, but the easiest way to make a seamless transition between Cinema 4D and just to get started on the right foot is to create it as a new layer. And what this will do, I'm going to go ahead and it's going to ask me to save it. Since I saved my project file in my project folder here, I can save my Cinema 4D file in that same location. I'm going to name it demo as well. It has a different extension. And now I have my Cinema 4D software's opening here. And if you haven't, I'm assuming you haven't opened it before, you're going to want to go through all of the prompts to register your product and to activate the license. So go ahead and enter your email. If your OU email doesn't work, enter a personal email. My Gmail account worked. Maybe I already have a Cinema 4D license with my OU email. I don't know why it didn't work for me, but I already went through all those prompts. What you're going to then want to do is click activate Cinema 4D Lite. The last thing that you'll have is to activate that. If anybody needs help getting Cinema 4D open or registering it, just let me know. Let me X out of this. And now I have Cinema 4D is open here as a separate software, but if I go back to After Effects, you'll see now that in my layer list, I have a Cinema 4D file, and I can see that I can see it in my active camera. Let me go ahead and change this back to one view for a minute, and I want my one view to be my active camera. And you see that the active camera view and the custom views are the same. And that is because this Cinema 4D file is not a 3D layer in After Effects. So this doesn't integrate seamlessly into 3D in After Effects. It's its own separate 3D environment. And so there are ways that we can match them up. And I'll get to that by the end of the tutorial. But what I only want you to see is that I have, and you can see here, I have a kind of this grid, which represents the 3D space. You can see that my file here is the file that's open in Cinema 4D. So Cinema 4D is a whole software package in itself. And this is Cinema 4D Lite, which means that we're getting just some of the capabilities of the full program. Let me show you a little bit around, let me navigate you around here. This central panel here is the viewport. And this is where, this is our view into the 3D space. The way that we can move around 3D space in Cinema 4D are with these buttons here, which are pan, zoom, and toggle. If I click these buttons and I move my mouse around, I'm able to pan around the space, or this one is zoom in and out, and this one is toggle around. So let me just move this like this, and I'm gonna hit S, go back to After Effects, and you'll see that here my camera has been updated. My view into my Cinema 4D world has updated. So whatever I do in Cinema 4D will appear here within my composition within this layer. Go back to Cinema 4D. But all of my edits, everything that I do will be in the Cinema 4D program. Okay, so there's some shortcuts for activating these functions here, the pan, the zoom, and the toggle, and that would be 1 on your keyboard is for pan, 2 is for zoom, and 3 is for toggle. You see here in the center, I have this little indicator of the axes orientation. So again, Y is green, this is standard, X is red, and Z is blue. And the way that the arrow is pointing is in the positive direction of all of those axes. Here is the center of our scene. This is the origin of the scene. Okay, so we have a whole toolbar on the top, and we have a toolbar on the side above the viewport panel. And then I have to the right of that an object panel, and this is a list of all of our objects in our scene. That's where this will populate. And below that will be the attributes. Right now I just have this project settings panel that's open, but these will be all of the attributes or properties of the objects we can access in this panel. Down here I have some position information. This is where I can create materials, and then I have my timeline. Okay, the first thing I'm going to want to do, if I go back to After Effects, you'll see that my Cinema 4D project is not the full length of my timeline. So I want to make sure that the length of my After Effects project The length of my Cinema 4D project matches the length of the duration of my After Effects project. So the way that I'm going to do that is in the project settings of Cinema 4D. I'm going to want to change here in project settings. And if you don't have this box popped up, you can find it under Edit, Project Settings. And here I can go to my maximum time and change the maximum time. Right now it's at 90 frames. So something that's different between Cinema 4D and After Effects is that After Effects, we work in seconds, right? We have here our time indicator is hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Below that, though, you can get the number of frames that are in this composition. So 30 seconds, which is what my composition is set at. And this is something I can change at any point, but I'm going to just change it at the beginning. I have here, the length of my composition right now is 899 frames. Go back to Cinema 4D and make the maximum time here 899 frames as well. Command S to save, go back to After Effects, and now, even though it's originally, you can see that it's set to just those 90, I can drag this out to the duration. So now my Cinema 4D layer will exist for the entirety of my composition duration. Okay. So let's create some objects here, and I have the Create button, the Create menu on my toolbar. I can create primitive shapes. These are all the primitive shapes that I can create. These are all the 3D shapes. So where we only really could create kind of a little bit of depth to a 2D surface in After Effects, here I can create full 3D editable models. So this primitive list here can also be found under this tool. And anytime you see this little black triangle, that means that there are, if I hold down on this icon, there are all of my options that are embedded, all of the tools that are embedded within this icon. And so I have all of my primitive shapes here. I have Spline tool, which means that just like I can use the pen tool in After Effects, I can use the pen tool here to generate a kind of vector-based path or form that then I can create a 3D model from. Then I have these generator tools. That we'll get into to further manipulate or deform our objects. These are deformer tools, and then I have my camera and my lights here. These are render tools. And so those are some of the tools that we have on our top toolbar. Let me go ahead and just create a cube by clicking this button here. And then I have a cube now that's generated in my scene. Command S on my keyboard and go back to After Effects, and there's my cube, which is now in After Effects. Let me go back to Cinema 4D, and you can see here in my object list, my cube has been added to my objects list here. And under my attribute panel, I have information about this object. I have basic information like its name. I can change the name of it. If I change it to something else, now that name will change up here in my object list. And so if I have a number of cubes, or I start to generate an entire, like architectural plan in Cinema 4D, if I have an entire kind of environment, I might want to change these and name them other things. I'm just gonna name it cube again, because that describes what this is. So I have some basic options here. I have its coordinates. So this is where it's positioned in space in the X, Y, and Z axis, its scale in X, Y, and Z. Let me scroll over here, and then here's its rotation information. Under object, this tells me the size of it. This is in centimeters and could be important if you're 3D printing, but we're not doing any 3D printing here. And then we have something called segments. And segments is how much definition is in this 3D object. It's hard to see if I increase this. Let me go ahead and show you something else about, okay, so this is our attribute panel here, and all of the kind of properties that are associated and that you can change and manipulate for these objects. For example, right, let's change the scale of this. and now in the Y direction, and now this has more of a rectangular form. Let's change its position information. I can type these values in. Okay, so now I'm moving it up in space. Okay, so some of these basic transform options here that I can, there's the coordinates options here, and you see this information here too for the object that I've selected. I can type a numeric value in here, or I can use these tools, which are the move, scale, and rotate tools. If I hover over any of these tools, I see that the shortcut, I see the name of the tool, and then I see the shortcut here is E, T, and R. So if I hit E on my keyboard, and I select any one of these axes indicators, I can move this object along these axes, or if I hit R, I can select any of these colored lines here, and I can rotate. You see here in the rotation, it's changing its value. Or I can scale. And because this, I'm going to be scaling kind of uniformly if I hit any of these. These little yellow circular indicators here will allow me to adjust the scale of this object in any of the directions. And I actually have access to these under any of the tools. Okay, let me go ahead and undo that so I maintain this to be a cube. So that's some of these transform tools that we have here, the move, scale, and rotate tool. And this is really how we can manipulate objects in the 3D space. You go ahead and hit save, and you'll see, go back to After Effects, and now my scene has updated in After Effects. So they are kind of talking to each other, which is nice. Okay, so I've created this object. I've kind of manipulated it with these rotate tools. Let me go ahead and delete this cube. If I want to hide it in my object list, I can hide this so I don't see it. It's not visible in my scene, but it's still there. And I wanted to maybe change its segments here. So that's something that I can, if I do that, let me say I wanted 3 segments. Can't really see it updated here in our scene, but let me go to my display. So display shows me, right now I have this first option here for display, but if I do that same shaded display with lines, now I can see some of the components and the way that the definition here in my 3D object. So these are, so now my object just has some segments to it. If I go back and do that, I can. Okay. And oh, that's another thing too, is I hit the R tool here. If I'm not hovering on any of these axes, right? If I'm just if I'm on the tool, but not selecting one of the axes indicators here, then I'm going to be dragging, I'm going to be manipulating this kind of free form in space. So that's just something to be aware of. And it's something that you can, use or not. So there's many different ways you can use these move, scale, and rotate tools. You can either do it free form in the viewport, or you can type in numerical values. You can use these axes indicators to just move it, that little yellow thing, just to move it or rotate or scale it in a single axis direction, or you can do it free form. Okay, so like I said, I have here, now this right now is a primitive shape. I have these other layers here, don't worry about these other tabs. I'm just gonna work in the attribute tab here. Okay, so I have this, so I have, right now this is what I wanted to do. I want to increase my segments here by 3. So now I have some more definition. So right now I have this object. It's a primitive object. You can see that by this icon. Let's say I want to model this object. I want to use this and I want to manipulate it further. In order to do that, I need to first convert this into a polygon object. So for example, right now, see these tools on the side here, I have my model mode, but I am also able to use move, scale, and rotate on the components of this object. But right now, because it's a primitive, I can't access its points or its edges. or its polygons, faces. So to access those things, I first need to select the object, and then I need to make it editable. And I can press C is the shortcut, or I can hit this icon at the top. And now I'm able to get into some of its components. For example, select this face, move this face out. So I'm not going to get into 3D modeling in this course, but I did want to show you, if you already know how to model and you're already familiar and you want to create complex 3D forms, then this is the way that you model with Cinema 4D. By first creating a primitive, just like in Maya or another software you might be familiar with. Create the primitive, which is like the hunk of clay or something. You add definition to it, and then you manipulate those components, whether they're points, points make edge, 2 points make an edge, 4 edges make a polygon, and then the polygons, or a face. We're used to calling them a face in Maya, but it's a polygon in Cinema 4D, and then all the polygons together make up the object. So I'm able to change the look of this. I'll go ahead and hit save, and back here in After Effects now my cube now looks like a much more interesting 3D form than, say, that shape layer that I created. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And you also see now that I made this editable, this icon changes, and you can see now that this is a polygon primitive. Go ahead and I'm going to delete this object in the scene and quickly show you the spline tool. So to use the spline tool, the first thing I'm going to do is change my display mode in the viewport. Right now I'm in perspective view. I'm going to go ahead and go to cameras and say top view. Okay. So I've already changed the shading mode here. Go back to the regular shading, the default shading. Under cameras, I can also change what type of camera I'm using. So I'll make this camera now from the top view, and I'm going to use my spline pen. And this looks familiar. I'm just dropping Bezier curves. I'm going to close this. Okay, and now I have something that looks familiar, a kind of path shape here. Let me go back to my cameras and say perspective. If I want to look at both, I can go to, I think I can say, panel and do, that's it. Under panel, I can do maybe 2 views, 4 views, all views, that's what I want. So if I go to panel, all views, now I can see a top, front, right, and a default camera. Go back to 1 view. So now I have it here in my perspective. So let's get into some of these tools here. If I'm using this spline tool, now you see I have, it's called a spline that's been added as an object to my object list. Let me go here, and this first tool is called Extrude. I have Extrude, Lathe, Loft, and Sweep, and these are all ways that I can then generate 3D object forms, primitive objects from that spline. Let me go ahead and hit Extrude, and nothing's happened because Extrude is now just an object that's been added to my scene. But if I want Spline to be affected by Extrude, I will go ahead and drop it under the Extrude. Now this looks similar to what we built in After Effects, right? We just extruded that spline, we've extruded that shape into a 3D form. If I go under Extrude now, under my attribute panel here, I can change its offset. Let's see, right? So I can change the I can change kind of the depth of this extrusion. I can add subdivisions, which again, you can't see unless we're working in display. Shaded lines, if I increase these subdivisions, it will add some more kind of definition to the side of this model, which then if I want to edit it, I can also make this editable at some point. I have some other options here, like caps. I can kind of make this a I can take the top and the bottom of this off here and just make it the side, or I can add caps to this object. I can bevel it as well. I can put a bevel on it like we did in After Effects, right? So that's what Extrude does, and that works really similar to what we did, but that was the only capabilities we had in After Effects. And here I can do a lot more things. Okay, so that's Extrude with the spline. Once I'm done editing this object, if I want to go in and model this further, what I need to do is I need to make sure that all of my objects, all of my attributes here are set. This is the basic form I want to work with. Then I can make this editable, turns this whole thing into a polygon object. Now I can go in and work with, let's say, my point tool and select a bunch of points and, you know, move them or something. Okay, so that's how we model a kind of a more organic form that I've created using a spline. Go ahead and delete this object. Let me do a different one. Let me go ahead and create, rather than using this pen tool, let me make a star, which is a kind of primitive shape here. And let's try a different one of these generators. Let's use Lathe and drop the star underneath Lathe. So now I'm generating a different kind of 3D form. And what this has done is it's kind of revolved a 3D form by, it's kind of taking that original star shape. Let's turn off the lathe so we just see the star. And what it's doing is it's taking the center position and it's kind of rotating it around to generate the 3D form. And where star is positioned in relation to that lathe will determine that shape. Okay, so our lathe object, we have our lathe object and we have our star object. So if I move the star, I can change the way that it's revolving around the center point of the lathe. So I have, that's just something, that's a way I can manipulate that. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I'm moving the lathe now. Let me move the star. Okay, yeah, you can kind of get a sense of that. Undo and just show you quickly one more time kind of what that means. Okay, so I have, before I go ahead and make the star a child of the lathe, I have my lathe object. So the lathe kind of, that lathe object, even though it has no information in it, or it's not a visible object in our scene, you know, it's positioned somewhere here in space. If I go to its coordinates, you can see that I'm changing. So what Lathe does is once I drop star into it, it's going to rotate these points around this center point. So I think it looks better and makes more sense if they're both at the same origin. Right now it's revolving that around it. Again, Lathe has some attributes that we can manipulate here. Okay, let's try a different thing. Let's create a flower and let's use like sweep. And I think sweep might need two. So we take an arc. Let me rotate the arc in the X direction here. Let me go ahead and just type a value instead. Okay, it's not letting me do it here, but in my attribute panel under arc, I'm going to change this and say -90. Now it's flat. And let me also move it. I can click this button here. Remember, I can hit E on my keyboard. I'm going to move this arc maybe towards the center. And now let's drop it under sweep, change its order. And now you can see that what sweep does is it is taking that original flower form and it's generating a 3D form based on that arc. So if I take my arc now and maybe manipulate the scale of it in the X direction, or maybe in the Z direction, doesn't do anything. Y. Okay, Y. It's going to change the way that these things interact. Let's turn off the sweep for a second. Again, we can go to my camera, go to my top view. Let's change this arc. Change its scale here so I can really see what's happening. And let's do it in that, and then in this direction also. Maybe 2 by 3. Let's make sure that I have, now I'm going to move it back to the origin. Now turn back sweep on, and now you can see that my flower is sweeping along that object. I'll go back to camera and say perspective view, and now I can see it in my perspective view. Okay, so these are ways, and then again, once I have this kind of set, there's other possibilities here for other attributes, but we're not going to get so much into them. But we have things like, you know, I can bevel this as well, bevel these edges if we want. Once I've kind of created the basic form that I want, let me go back to display and just see the shading mode. Now you can see what that bevel looks like. Let me go ahead and save. Let's look what this looks like in After Effects now. Now we can see that form here. Back to Cinema 4D. So once again, if I want to model this at all, if you're interested in doing any 3D modeling, then you can go ahead and make it editable. Now I can access all of its points. Okay, so that's a way that I can generate some kind of interesting looking 3D objects here using the spline. The last thing I want to show you that deals with some of these tools here is let's add some primitives and then use some of these generator tools. So the first thing I'll do is let's go back to my shading lines, because I do like to see this if I'm working with my segments. And I have this cube here. If I want to duplicate the cube, which means I want to create a copy of it, I can hit Command and then move, and this will move a copy out. This is different than in Maya, which is, and Command does something different in Maya, so just be aware of that Command, holding down Command while you have an object selected and moving it will duplicate your object. What I'm going to do now is I have cube and cube 1. So for cube 1, I'll increase its segments just so you can see what this looks like. What subdivision surface looks like, I'm going to create now 2 subdivision surfaces, and I'm going to drop them in. And what this does is it will kind of generate a smoothed look to your model. So let me go ahead and drop these under, and you can see that it's smoothing the object based on the amount of detail that it has. So we have kind of a smooth corner. So what it's doing right here is it's saying, okay, I'm going to divide this surface and then I'm going to interpret a kind of smooth transition between it. I'm going to go ahead and redo those 2 things. You can see what this looks like with something that has more definition and something that has less. That's what subdivision surface does. I think it looks better. This looks just like a sphere, so I'm going to go ahead and keep this second subdivision surface. I'm going to go and let me show you array. I'm going to create a capsule, and I'm going to use array, wrong tools, array, and I'm going to drop capsule under array. And now I've created a bunch of copies of that capsule. And then I have, again, just like I have under subdivision, I have attributes here that I can edit. And under array, I also have some attributes that I can edit, like how many copies there are. what the amplitude is. Amplitude's not really doing anything. Neither is frequency. So this is just some of the different attributes here for array. And then let me show you Boolean, which is Boolean requires 2 objects. And again, I can only use these tools with these primitive objects. Once I make it editable, I can't go back and use these tools. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let me go ahead and choose this cone and then a sphere. Let me move them so they're near each other. Let me make sure they're at the same place in space here. I'm going to say -600, or let's do -700. Do the same thing for the cone. Let's move this to be -700. So they're right on top of each other. And now let me go ahead and place a Boolean operator in here. Just generate a bool. And I'm going to go and drop both of these objects under the bool. Now you see my spheres disappeared. And let me go to my bool attributes, go to the object, and you see here the bool type is A subtract B. So B has been subtracted. Let me show you what this looks like. And you can see it if we toggle under. I have now the sphere is being cut away from the cone. If I change this to say A union B, now they're one object. That if I zoom in, I can zoom all the way into it maybe. Now you can see that, now it's going to be kind of hard to see perhaps, but they're one object rather than 2. Or I can do A intersect B, so the combination of those two, so where those two intersect, or A without B, which means that it's kind of cutting a hole. So A, use the edge of B to cut a hole through the cone, okay? So those are the different options. I think A subtract B works well. And I can still go in and kind of move these objects. You can see how the bool affects it. Or if I, pull it this way, right, and take a chunk out of there. So once I have this the way I like, and if I've messed with its attributes, and if I want to go in and model this even further, I have to make it editable. Okay, so we get that process, right? Let me go ahead and make the bool. Let me scale this. And it's scaling in relation to these objects, so which you can see is kind of problematic. Let me scale the cone up instead. Scale, I wonder if I can scale them together. Kind of, no, I can only scale one at a time. Let me just scale these up so that they're a little bit bigger in my scene. And let me pan over. Okay, so now I have some objects to work with. Go back to my subdivision, or go back to my array here. I just want to move my array over so I have some room. So I have these, I'm going to collapse these objects here, and I'm going to go ahead and save. Now my After Effects, here it's been updated. Okay, so let's say that now that let's work in After Effects just a little bit more. I'm actually going to go to C4D and turn off that shading mode so I can not see those lines here. Okay, there we go. Now let's say that I want to kind of view this C4D file in 3D space. Like I want these two things to interact. Because again, if I go to C4D and I kind of pan, this camera and save is not associated with the camera here. So how do I do that? Well, what I can do is, let's go back to C4D just to start. And I want to say, let's go to my camera. let's go to a front view. Let's look at this from the front, just to get us started. Let me pan, get it centered, save, and go back to After Effects. Now I have this as a front view as well. And so now for my Cinema 4D layer, I can go to my camera and say centered comp camera instead of using the Cinema 4D camera. Once I do that, now I can create let's create a camera in my After Effects scene. And here we have the active camera. Now let me rotate my shape layer. If I hit R, let's rotate this a little bit in my scene. And so now I'm looking through my camera here. Let's rotate the camera, right? Let's go to camera, transform, and let's move the camera. Now we're moving everything in our scene. I'm going to use two views here for a second. This view I'm going to make my custom view, and I don't see my Cinema 4D objects here. So you're just going to have to kind of understand that that's just, you're not able to, they're not really in the 3D space. Let me turn back on my light as well. And that's another thing. The light that I have in my scene is also not affecting those Cinema 4D objects. It's only affecting, so the Cinema 4D, it has the active camera. The camera now is associated with it, but the lights are not. So there's some workaround for that as well, if you need it. So my camera now, but what I'm showing you is that these two are a bit more integrated because the camera that they're using is the same. Let me select my camera in my custom view. Make sure I have my selection tool. Move back. Now I can see all my objects. And let me rotate the camera, or actually I'll change its point of interest. Let's move its point of interest. Okay. So now I can key this camera if I want to here, you know, so now these two things are integrated. So that's good. Let me go ahead and save this. And let me do a couple other things. So I can add let's start to add some animation to this. Okay, so I have my scene. I've shown you how to model in Cinema 4D and how to bring that into After Effects, and then how to combine those two scenes by going again to our demo and changing the camera under project settings to a centered comp camera. This is important because we want to center the camera in the composition. 0, 0 for After Effects is in the bottom corner, and we want 0, 0 to be in the center of the space, like it is in Cinema 4D. Let me go back to Cinema 4D, but if I want to, now what I was saying is I want to start to add some keyframes, so I can keyframe this shape, for example. Let's key maybe its rotation. Let's make it rotate. Let me go to the beginning of my timeline. I'm going to zero this out. Let me hit my stopwatch, and maybe about 5 seconds in. Let's go to 5 seconds. I am going to rotate this around one time. Okay, so I have just a little bit of something animated here. It's going to take a while to process this, but, and I also maybe want to rotate this so I can get that beveled edge. It looks a bit flat. Let me rotate this in the Y and the Z a little bit. That's another thing that you know, it doesn't matter where this is in the scene, because it's the layer hierarchies maintained. These objects will always appear in front of whatever's behind them, unless I can drop them in front of my Cinema 4D objects, and now this object appears in front. So this, how you kind of make your After Effects layers interact with your Cinema 4D layer. Some of these things get maintained, like the fact that this is a layer. These will, you know, appear or be in front of or behind other objects depending on the hierarchy here. Okay, so now I have a little bit of some animated, something animated here with my shape. So with the shape that I have in After Effects, so let me go back to Cinema 4D. I also have those material things that maybe I want to add. So let's go back to Cinema 4D and let me add some materials and some animation here. Bring that back into After Effects and then we'll render it out. Okay, so to create materials, I know this is a lot and hopefully you're getting something out of it and maybe get excited about using 3D. So to create materials, I'm gonna go down to this material panel here and say create, new default material. There's material presets, maybe that you've loaded or not. I'm gonna create a new default material and along with some of, if I go to my basic tab, I have things like luminance, glow, transparency, a lot of different attributes here that I can manipulate with my material. I'm gonna just go over the basics, which is color. Maybe make this one red. I'm gonna go back to basic here and I'm gonna just name this red. So all my materials will populate here. I'm gonna go ahead, create new default material and name this material blue and change its color to be a blue value. And I'm gonna create a new material and make it appear yellow and name this yellow. And now I'm gonna just drag and drop these materials because right here I just have a kind of default gray material applied. I can drag and drop these materials onto my objects. So my Boolean, again, remember my cone and spheres are two separate objects. Maybe I'll create one more material then. And name this one orange, purple, and make this a kind of purple value. And I'll put this on the sphere. Okay, so I can either drag and drop it here, I can drag and drop it into my object list. And so now if I want to change any of these materials, like let's say I don't like purple for the sphere, I want red for the sphere, I can grab that material and I'm going to put it right over that icon. Okay, go ahead, hit save, go back to After Effects. Those material properties have been updated. Another thing I want to do quickly is I have this light in the scene. Let me go back to Cinema 4D and change my, let me go back to my perspective camera. And I'm going to put a light. I'm going to put my own spotlight. I did an area light by mistake. I want to do a spotlight. A lot of these are going to be similar to what you have already are familiar with in After Effects. I have my light object here, so this looks familiar, right? Just kind of put this in the scene in the same general place that the After Effects light is. And let me hit scale, and let me scale this up. Let me hit select for the light, and let me increase the radius. Oh, that's live selection. That's not what I want to change. Okay, okay, that's changing the radius of my selection tool. That's not helping me. There we are, select my light. And I would like to, I'm going to delete this light because this is a spotlight. If I just hit light, now I can, this is what I want. Okay, so I have a light in the scene. This is a point light, and now I can change it under, let's see. I should be able to make it a spotlight. I'm not super familiar with this, so maybe I do want to create a spotlight. Let's see, create lights. This, I can do it like this too. Okay, let's try another spotlight. I just want to increase its the cone radius here. Maybe it's scale. There we are. Okay, so let me increase it, kind of position it. Oh, I don't want the Z. Let's bring this back to 1, that's better. And let me rotate it, hit R here, kind of rotate it, place it in space. I might actually want it to be even bigger, so scale it, move it back in space. So I'm just gonna try to move it back further so we can really illuminate these objects. Getting too far away from it. Let's save, see what that looks like in After Effects. Okay, we kind of have a little bit of a similar look, perhaps. Maybe now I can go in and change this light here. So it's kind of matching my scene. So it's really about matching these lights. There are probably other ways to really manipulate, to maybe seamlessly create lights and stuff and export lights from one project to another, but those aren't capabilities that I'm familiar with or we're going to dive into here. But so here I kind of have a bit of this is how I can I can create a spotlight here or lights here, and then I can try to recreate those lights in my Cinema 4D scene. And the last thing I want to show you is creating some animation. Okay, so to animate in Cinema 4D, you have all of these little buttons here, meaning that all of these attributes are editable. Works similarly to any other animation software. The only thing I'm going to show you here, so you can dive into this, but that's the basic. That's just so that you kind of understand the way that you would key. You can key anything that has this little button, and that is how you create keys. So, for example, under my cone object, or under the bool object, let's move the whole bool up and down. Let's say I want to position the bool. Let's go to my coordinates here. Let's go from 500. And to key this now, I'm going to just click this. Then I'm going to take my time slider and jump ahead to maybe 30 frames in and move this back to 0. And now you'll see that it won't add an automatic key. I need to click that to make a key. You see that now I have these keys here. I can move them if I want. I can change what frame they exist. But when let me go ahead and select my bool here. So under my coordinates here, so this is keyed, right? You see it's red. If I slide in my time slider somewhere else, now it has that red outline, which means that there is a key. There are keys placed on this property or on this attribute, but not at that particular moment in time. So let's just kind of have this Boolean object jump up and down. Let's bring this back, I guess, to 500 and then key it again. If you see that yellow, did you see that yellow? It means that I've made a change that I haven't keyed. Like, for example, if I go ahead and move this, it's saying that I've changed the position of this, but I haven't keyed it, so that position won't, maybe that change won't be maintained because we already have you see I have this kind of indicator here now that this is the kind of motion path here of this object. Okay, for my let's see, for my array, let's rotate it and key that. Let me scroll over and no, that won't do it. Let's see. I think I want to rotate in the X, rotate around the X. There we are. Okay, so I might let's see how I can key this here. There we are. Okay, so it's going to be this value. So let me make a key, and then at 80, let's make this 360. Key it again. Now should have rotated a full rotation around. And then let's say maybe for this subdivision surface, let's key its scale. Let's scale it in the Y direction, set a key, and then 40 in. We can increase this to 80. Oh, that's huge, but whatever. And go back to 80 here and bring this back to 0. Or what was it, at 1? Okay, and now go back to the beginning. Oh, I didn't key it. Let's key it. Back to 1, press key. Make sure I set a key. I have to do that every time. There's no auto key. And now if I want to play through this timeline, I go ahead and hit play. I've set a second key. Let's see. Oh, because this is so big. Let me modify this key. And if I click the key, you can see that I can modify the value of that key. Let me click it here. Let me modify the value to be 20. Let's modify that value to be 8. There we go. That's more in the scale range of what I'm working in. Now, I have this bit of 3D animation between 0 and 80. So now hit save. Let's go back to After Effects. Let's just look through our first view. And I don't want custom view. Let's do one view. And let's do an active camera view. And now, let me maybe move my camera. Let me move the position of my camera out a little bit. And that's rotating it. Oh, okay, let's set some keys for the camera too, right? Just why not? Add a lot of dynamic motion here. Let's set a key in After Effects. And then, let's see, maybe by here, I'll set another key. Let's rotate this around here. Set another key, and let me move this out a bit. Let me say P for position, and move my camera out in the scene, and maybe up a bit. I'm still seeing this 3D workspace here. If I go to Cinema 4D here and I go to Filter, I can turn off the workplace grid. Now that deletes that from the scene. And let's go ahead and render this out. Again, I really only have animation for the first couple seconds here. Let's stop this animation where this key is. I'm going to just drag the end of my animation to be here and save it again. And let's export. I can maybe just render it here in After Effects instead of sending it to the media encoder. Go ahead and render comp 1. Now we can see what this looks like here as it's rendering. I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause because as you can see, I still have this, axis indicator here. So let's stop it Let's go back to Cinema 4D and turn this off as well by going to Filter, Axis. Let's turn that off. See if I can't get rid of it. There we are, get rid of it. Save, go back to After Effects. Let me go back, let's get rid out of this render view here, because now that my media encoder's opened. And let's make sure my scene here, okay, there's no extra elements, only my objects. Go to media encoder. Let's make sure, actually, let's resend this. Let's send this to the media encoder now. The media encoder. And here we have my most recent. Let's delete these, make sure that I want to delete all of these and then send it one more time over. After Effects, export to media encoder. Populate here in a second, and then I'm going to hit play and let it export, and then we'll preview it by the end of this tutorial. There we are. It's ready to export. Export it as, that's fine, comp 1. I didn't save it as anything else. I can see where I want to export this, and it's exporting right here. So go ahead and do that, and I will come back to you when it's done. Okay, this is about ready to end the render. And then let's go find that file. Okay, and so I see a lot of problems with this render here, in that it is really grainy. And so I might want to go back to After Effects here. I can see that it is very grainy because of those lights. Let's go to let's see what we have here for render settings. And this is why I want to render. Let's go back to this here. Under my render settings, I want my renderer to be current. And that is the last piece that I did not do. So let's go ahead and do that one more time. Export. Now that that's something that I want to make sure that I have. Let's go ahead and render this again. Awesome. I can't wait to see. Give me 1 second. I'm almost completely done. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so now let's look at what that looks like compared, right? So I think we still have this one open, and look how grainy that looks. That looks terrible. Let's open up this new render, and that looks much better. So that is the full kind of scope of Cinema 4D with After Effects. I am here if you have any specific questions about using either of these two programs. You don't have to use it for your final, but I just want to give you that option, give you one last final kind of in-depth tutorial about the software.